What a beautiful day. It's good to see everyone here today. So we have officially moved into March. How many of you would have thought we would be in this plot at this point? How many of you would have thought we would even be here at all at this point? March 2023. Seems weird to say that, doesn't it? I mean, I remember as a child, I didn't know how long I would be on the earth or any of that. I knew that we only had limited time here. And it's interesting when you think about that because, you know, growing up, and I grew up through the 70s and 80s and, you know, was young in the 90s and still young to some others. It's one of those situations where, though, when you look back and you think, wow, we have changed so much in such a little time. I remember back in, we were in Thomaston, Georgia back in the late 90s as we were moving in from 99 to 2000 and everybody was so afraid. Everything was going to shut down in the year 2000. Oh, Y2K bug. Y'all remember that, for those of you that were around. You know, and we have, man is so fearful of everything. You ever notice that? We are afraid of just about everything. And it's funny, we have a day that we talk about as a Groundhog's Day, where the groundhog comes out and he sees his shadow and he runs back in. And there's a lot more involved in that than him predicting how much longer the winter is going to be. It actually has absolutely nothing to do with winter. But it's interesting that we are as afraid as people make that groundhog when he sees a shadow out today. We're afraid of everything. We're afraid of anything. Do you know what fear does for us? It keeps us down. It limits us in what we can and can't do. It puts us in a box that makes us have to sit there and think, okay, what's next? I remember when I first started learning how to drive, my mom was sitting in the passenger seat. We're going down the road. Now, I learned to drive in a big city of Newport News, Virginia. If you've ever been over there, you know why I say the big city. Because you've got Newport News, you got Hampton, you got Norfolk, and all of that stuff is right there together. And then you cross over the river a little further, you got Suffolk, you got Virginia Beach over. It's huge. And it's not as big as you would think it is, but as many people as live in that little bitty area, it really is a large place. And so I learned to drive on those roads. And I remember I'd get somebody in my that would be behind me, and I'd look in my rearview mirror and I'd think, okay, I need them to quit riding my bumper. And so I'd speed up, and Mom would always say, don't speed. I was like, well, I got somebody that's riding my tail, and she says, let them ride your tail. Don't be afraid of them and make them determine how you're going to go. Mom had some wise words there. Don't be afraid of them and dictate to you how you're going to be. And that's what's wrong in our society today. We have become afraid of everything, and we allow others to dictate to us how we're going to be. And we need to realize that there's something better. Think about this. All of us that have obeyed the gospel are Christians. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter anything. It doesn't matter where you were immersed into Christ. None of that's important. Well, being immersed into Christ is important, but where you were immersed isn't. Talking to some people, some were immersed in creeks, some were immersed in rivers, some were immersed in a baptistry. Doesn't matter. That's not the important issue. The important issue is the obedience we had to Christ. And why did we do that? Why did we want to become Christians? Oh, I know the ultimate answer that most people give is, well, I didn't want to go to hell. I wanted to be with God in heaven. Well, then that means we fear something else, which caused us to react to something else. Which, in this case, isn't a bad situation, but it's a reaction based on fear rather than on love of God. How many of us allow people to rob us of our joy? Let's think about that. How many of us allow people to rob us of our joy? Do you realize that Christians ought to be the most joyful people in the world? We should. And we're going to talk about this morning. The joy to be a Christian. We're going to come out of Philippians here in just a moment in chapter 1 as we look at verses 19 through 26, because it's important for us to understand the joy that we have. And if there is ever a writing that we have in the New Testament or in the Old Testament about joy, the letter to the Philippians is that perfect letter. Because he talks about joy through the whole thing. I love one of his statements found in chapter 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Now, granted, it doesn't say joy there, but it has the words understanding in that word rejoice. We should be the most joyful individuals on the face of the earth. Why? Because of who we are. Because of what Christ has done for us. For the things that you and I have because of. We don't have to fear. We have no need of fear. Because as John writes in 1 John, love drives out fear. Our love for God, our love for Christ, our love for what they've done for us, causing us to be what we need to be for those around us. Joy. There is so much joy in being a Christian that sometimes I think we barely scrape the surface on what that really means. Read with me. We're going to read starting in verse 19, going to verse 26. For I know this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live in the flesh, this will mean fruit for my labor. Yet what I shall choose, I cannot tell. For I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. And being confident of this, I know that I shall remain and continue with you all for your progress, and see it, and joy of faith, that your rejoicing for me may be more abundant in Jesus Christ by my coming to you again. Paul says so many things in this little bit of area of Scripture, does he not? To live. Think about that. To live. To live. Or to die. when Paul writes these words, Paul is in prison. He probably will not get out. He will most likely be at this point put to death. He is going to be let out and in an arena somewhat similar. In an area of spectacle, he is going to be beheaded before a Roman audience. You know what? Paul's not worried about it. Paul does not fear death, but rejoices in life. There's a difference. When I talk to people, one of the greatest fears man has is death. And I can go through and I can ask every single one of us, and we're all going to give the exact same answer I'm about to give of why we fear death. And it's because we do not know what's beyond. Man fears death. Man fears death so much that there are those that will spend billions and billions of dollars to try to keep themselves from dying. To no avail. But I want us, instead of looking at the fear of death, to look at the understanding of rejoicing in life. Because we have areas in our life that you and I need to show joy in so that those around us will know there is something better than this life. There is something better than what's coming. There is something better. And it all starts in having an understanding of joy in salvation. In Acts chapter 8, you get down to verses 26 to 40 and you start reading about the Ethiopian eunuch. Now this is what's so amazing to me is, here Philip is told to join himself with the eunuch. He goes up, he ends up joining himself with the eunuch. They're going on their way. The eunuch is reading from Isaiah and he asks Philip a simple question. Is this man talking about himself or someone else? And it says that Philip began at that verse and preached unto him Christ. And as they went on their way, they came to a body of water, and the eunuch said, look, here is water. What hinders me from being baptized? And Philip says, if you believe. He says, well, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And it says they went down into the water, both of them, and he was immersed, and they came up, and the eunuch went away. You ready for that word? Rejoicing. There is joy in salvation because you and I have had our sins completely and totally removed from us. They are no longer an issue. They are no longer a problem. God has taken care of the illness that you and I could not get beyond. So when I was a kid, I guess I was probably in the 4th-ish grade. We were outside, it was recess, and we were all kids playing around, and the PE teacher was out there with us, and he was goofing off with us. And we were playing a game of chase, and all the kids were basically chasing him. And I remember running into one of the kids. And I got knocked down. I was fine. I got up. And when I was ready to start playing some more, and one of the kids looked at me and said, hey, Dennis, what's wrong with your arm? What do you mean? Well, about that time, one of the teachers apparently heard it too and saw that I had ran into this kid. So she came over to check on me. And when she was checking on me, she noticed something wasn't right about my arm. And she said, we need to take you to the nurse. Okay, I'm in 4th grade. I look down, and I could tell, looking at my arm, that everybody was afraid of something. And it kind of got to me and scared me, and I started crying. And she takes me in, and the nurse looks at it, and she says, I think he has a broken bone. And so they call my mom. Mom comes and picks me up. They've got me in a makeshift sling. Basically, I've got a magazine that she's wrapped around my hand and put me in a sling, basically. And my mom's going to take me to the doctor. Well, she gets me to the doctor. And the doctor comes over, and he's looking at me. And my arm's in this sling, and he takes my hand, and he moves it up. And as he does, I feel the pain. And I scream out so loud that the nurses down the hall at the desk literally looked around the corner to make sure everybody was okay. The doctor looks at my mom. He says, I cannot do anything for you. You need to get him to a hospital, specifically one that deals with broken bones. In other words, my mom was being told, you need to take him to a specialist hospital. So she ends up taking me in Houston. I don't know if any of you remember any of the stuff about Houston, but there was a hospital there called Ben Taub. And Ben Taub was the trauma center place. This is where, when people had issues, this is where they went. And when I say issues, I'm not talking about a little minor cut or scrape. I'm talking, these are people that have had serious accidents, such as a motorcycle accident or a guy jumping off a building. This is where they go. And so I'm sitting in the ER with my mom, and they're rushing people through. They're not worried about me. I'm not life-threatening. These guys are. And I saw something about life that day that I don't want to ever have to deal with personally. But I was afraid. I was afraid. And the reason I was afraid is because at a very young age, I literally saw how small we really are. Now, I didn't think too much about the smallness as much as how easily we can hurt ourselves and cause serious damage to ourselves. Later in life, I learned how to replace that with the joy that we have from God because of what He's done for us in salvation. And I've taken that ability to go from the joy of salvation, and instead of looking at death, I've learned to look at the joy of life. And the Bible teaches us about that joy. Specifically in James chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. We have the joy of life. Because in life, we have overcome sin. I'm not talking physical life, I'm talking spiritual. I'm talking the ability we have to know that Jesus Christ died for us. And it's because of us, it's because of our own lusts that we're drawn away from Him. But we can have life. After all, that's what He came to give us. And the joy of life is so much better. Because it doesn't bog us down. We think about the great things that we have. We think about what's going on. And how many of us do not look at the future and go, wow, what is it going to really be like? You've done that, haven't you? I don't know what heaven's going to be like. But I know something for sure about heaven. have to worry about anything. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 17 through 21, he talks about a home. And you and I can have the joy of our home. Now, I'm not talking our physical home. I'm not talking about the place that we actually lay our head down to sleep, or we eat, or we spend time with our family. I'm not talking that home. I'm talking our eternal home. And we can look forward to it. And there's joy in looking forward to that eternal home. There's joy in understanding exactly what there is. The greatest thing that you and I have is what we look forward to. We may not know what heaven's going to be, but we know who's going to be there. So, I remember taking trips as a kid. And I remember we were going to certain places. Just north of Houston is a little town called Conroe. Now, it may actually be part of Houston now, as far as I know, with all the way Houston's grown up. But it didn't used to be that way. It used to be trees and everything on the way up there. It's all concrete now. But in Conroe, we had relatives. We had friends and family. And although we didn't get to see them often, there were some of the family that I looked forward to seeing. I got excited about it. Because I was able to know that I was going to get to see them. Specifically, when it came to my dad's side of the family, because it was his cousins and his family in that sense. And we didn't, like I said, we didn't get to go over there often. But we got to go over there. And I enjoyed, as a kid, I would get excited. And the more I think about heaven today, the more I get excited about what it's going to be like. Because that's our home. That's where we're going to be. And what's even more is what we read about through Paul here in the letter to the Philippians. Can you put up verse 23 for me again? For I am hard pressed between the two. Between the two what? Between whether he wanted to stay here or whether he wanted to go home. I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to part and be with Christ, which is far better. Now, just above that is where he writes, he pens that it was a split of whether he wanted to live in Christ, which is meaning to die. He still had Christ. You're not going to take that away from someone. If a Christian leaves this world, he's still a Christian. It doesn't change. And so to live is Christ, meaning on this earth, striving to be, do, and live the things that we're supposed to so that others see him. And we live that life that he's given us to live. But to die as gain means that we get to go home. Why wouldn't we have joy? Why wouldn't we have the things that we desire for Christ being seen in our life? We should be like Paul. hard pressed between the two. Whether we want to stay or whether we want to go home. There are days in my life where I am so thankful I've been able to share with people. I've been able to see some things in their lives that takes place. I've been able to be part of things that have happened in my son's lives. Talk to Caleb. Caleb is so excited over something that's about to happen. I mean, he is beside himself. I'm not going to ruin it for him. I'll let you talk to him if you want to know what it is. He is so excited. And I'm excited for him. I'm looking forward to it. That's how we ought to be when it comes to Christ. Our joy should be such excitement that we can't help but. We want to be part of it. We've got a choice. We can do the will that God has set forth for us. We can live the life that God has set forth for us. Or we can turn it away. But I can tell you this. If a Christian does not have joy, that Christian needs to rethink where he is or where she is in life. Because joy should be the number one thing that you and I have because of what we've done. And everybody should see it. Everybody should understand it. And so I ask you, where is your joy? And do you have it? If you're not a Christian, I plead with you. Today's the day to become one. Let us help you with that. So that you can have the joy of salvation. So that you can have the joy of life. So that you can have the joy of a future home. Let us help you. If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, you're willing to change your life from a life of sin to a life of righteousness, and you're willing to confess Him before men, the water's ready, the witnesses are ready. We can help you today in getting your life in Christ right now. For those of us that are Christians, if you're not living it, if there's no joy in your life of being a Christian, today's the day to do something about it. Let us help. Let us get you back on the right track. Whatever the case is, take hold of this opportunity. Step out and come forward right now while together we stand and sing this invitation song.